All right. So welcome everybody to another episode of Positively Family Law. Today we have Attorney Vacchi here with us today, and we are going to be discussing child support guidelines in Massachusetts.
Very exciting.
So, Jolie, can you give us just like a general overview of what exactly is child support guidelines?
Sure. So I'm going to kind of approach this from a high level perspective because there's a lot of nuance and things that can be different on a case by case basis based on different variables and different situations. So just generally, the child support guidelines are actually a document, which I have here. They are 26 pages long, and you can access them online. If you go to mass.gov, the website's mass.gov, you can find them there. And it's a document that there's a task force in Massachusetts, and every few years they get together and they update the child support guidelines. And why they do that is because they want to account for the higher standard of living costs. They take into consideration some court opinions that have come down in the past few years, and they update the guidelines so that they stay current. And what the guidelines are is it's basically a set of rules that all of the courts and judges are supposed to apply when they are entering child support orders in Massachusetts. And the main goal of the guidelines is to create some kind of a standard. So they want to, as much as is humanly possible, be able to have similar type situations where a family of 4 with 2 parents and 2 kids making similar incomes, this case over here and this case over here, they basically have a very similar child support order. So they want to avoid similar situations having vast discrepancies in the child support order. So it's really basically a rules for standardization across the board. However, as I was kind of alluding to, every case can be very different. There is some cases where the child support can be deviated for certain reasons. Income can be calculated in different ways. So when you think about child support, you think that it should be pretty straightforward. And in some cases it is. But if you have any kind of complexity to your case, or you think you might, child support is definitely an area where I think talking to an attorney, at least to bounce some ideas off of and get some advice, is a really good idea, just because there, like I said, a lot of nuances that can go into it. And these rules, these child support guidelines, they create what is called a child support worksheet, which I have here. And you can also find this online at mass.gov. And in Massachusetts, it's nice. They have a PDF version that you can go in, anybody can do it, and enter, how many children you have, what your income is, some expenses, and it does the calculation itself. The formula is already built in, and it spits out a number at the bottom for what the child support order should be. And I also encourage my clients to go and to try it out for themselves and see how it can, the outcome can vary based on the different numbers that they put in or the different boxes that they click, and why it's in it, so they can kind of better understand things that we're talking about when we're in court and before the judge. So that's kind of a high level overview of what the child support guidelines are, and then also the worksheet that goes along with it.
Perfect. So like you said, these are just a generalized list of rules. So obviously it is case by case. So even, if you think that, the base level of these guidelines says something, it might not be the same way in your specific case based on those other factors.
That's for sure. And so I guess I should also mention that that number that the calculator comes out with, that is the default number that the judge is ordered to enter as the child support order. It's called a rebuttable presumption. So that number is what should be the child support order. However, attorneys and also pro se litigants, they can make arguments for why there should be a deviation for that number. Either it should be increased or it should be decreased. But you have to have a pretty compelling reason for one of those deviations, because that number that the calculator comes up with is what the court is supposed to order. Of course, they have discretion, and judges can apply deviations based on how they see fit, but that number is really the starting place. So that's important to know too.
Gotcha. Okay. So now, when it comes to this equation, I know you touched on it very, very briefly, but what goes into the equation that determines child support?
That's a really important question, and it's important for people to know this too. So you have this calculator, and the first thing that you have to put in is the number of children, because if there are more children, then the child support order would be increased versus if there was less children. So there's a box for number of children. The second piece is about the parenting schedule. So there's different boxes to check based on what your situation is. If the children primarily live with one parent most of the time, what we call primary physical custody, there's a box for that. It's actually called the children reside primarily with the parent for about 2/3 of the time. So there's a box for that. Or there's another box if the parents share more of a 50-50 schedule. So there's a box for that. And then there's a third option where this is more rare, but in some circumstances, there's families where, let's say, for example, there's a son and a daughter, and the son lives with the dad and the daughter lives with the mom. It's called a split custody situation, and there's a box for that. So that box and which one you check can have a very big effect on what the ultimate number is. If there's a primary custody situation where, let's say, for example, the kids live with dad most of the time, that order is going to be higher than if the kids were to split their time almost equally between the two parents. So there's a section for the parenting schedule. After that is you input your income. And it's important to note that this is gross income of the parties. So this is before taxes are taken out. This is money that you never even see most of the time because it's automatically deducted for your paycheck. So if your gross salary is $100,000 a year, and let's say, for example, you only see 75% of that, you still have to put in the 100,000. You use your gross income. This box is an area where there could be a lot of nuances. The guidelines actually detail 30 different types of income that can be considered in this box, this one box alone. In some cases, it's relatively straightforward. If you're a W-2 employee and you get a weekly or bi-weekly paycheck, it's very easy to, come up with that number. But it can get very complex. For example, let's say there's somebody who owns their own business. Those kind of cases can get so crazy. Actually, they can require, like forensic accountants and things like that to go through, because the money that people report on their tax returns for business purposes, some of that money can be considered in the child support calculation because you can deduct things on taxes, but they still count for child support. So if you own your own business, that would definitely, I would recommend, be a situation where you'd want to consult with an attorney, because it can get very gray and murky in those situations. But overtime income, bonus income, rental income, rental property income, all different kinds of things. RSUs, which are stock units that you can get money from every year. There's a bunch of things that can go into that box. So it's a very important box. But the gist of it is you put your income in for each of the parents. So income is one of the factors that's considered in the calculation. Next, you detail how old the kids are. So there's a difference if you have kids that are under 18 versus if you have kids that are over 18. You're going to get a higher child support order if your kids are under 18. If your kids are over 18, the calculator automatically deducts 25%. So you get a lower child support order because they assume that, the child is, maybe attending college or also working part-time. So there's a deduction there, but you detail out how many kids are over 18 and under 18. These are the other important numbers besides income that you have to consider for child support. If one of the parties is paying either child support or alimony for an unrelated child or former spouse, that number gets put in there. So because it wouldn't make sense if they're, paying that, they're not seeing that money, they're paying child support or alimony to someone else. So it gets deducted from them. So if any other support obligations are being paid, that number comes off. Health care, so premiums for health insurance are deducted for each parent. For the parent who's covering the children, they get a deduction, and also the parent let's say they have just an individual plan, they still get to take that deduction. They don't have to be paying health insurance for the children. So healthcare costs, and then there's a deduction for dental and vision insurance. And this one's a little bit different than the health insurance. Only the parent who's providing coverage for the children gets to take that deduction. So let's say dad has his own dental and vision insurance, but he's not paying for the kids. He won't get that deduction, only on the health insurance. And finally, the other important number is childcare costs.
Okay.
So if you have to pay for daycare expenses, an after school program, a nanny, any of that kind of thing, that number gets considered in the calculation. Oh, I guess I should have mentioned, because this is a little important. I said the child support guidelines are updated every few years. They were actually recently just updated and took effect on October 4th, 2021. So we are dealing right now with a new set of guidelines. And one of the big changes in this version of the guidelines is that childcare costs you can take up to $355 per week per child in childcare costs. And basically what the new formula does is it'll apply the percentages. Let's say mom makes 70% of the income, dad makes 30% of the income. This new formula will apply that to the childcare cost. So if it's $355 a week, this formula assumes mom should be paying 70% of that childcare cost, dad should be paying 30% of that cost. So that is now built in to this new version of the guidelines. So you put in all of those numbers that we just talked about, big ones, like I said, income, other child support obligations, health insurance, dental insurance, and childcare. You put them in this worksheet, and then this worksheet's 4 pages long. You put the numbers in on the first page, and then all the numbers magically appear on the following pages, and that number for the child support gets spit out at the bottom, and that is what the default child support number is.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's a hefty equation, but it seems like the worksheet really helps clarify everything. And it's good that people can just go and run those rough numbers so they have a generalized idea of what they could be receiving or could be paying in child support.
So, yep, it is a pretty user-friendly PDF, like I said. So you just go in, you put in the information, and then the sheet does the rest. It has the math built into it, and so you can see what number it comes out with at the end.
Awesome. Okay. So now, in regards to modifications to child support, how do the guidelines, work with that? If you were to file a modification, how do the guidelines differ? How does it, how does that get changed?
So child support can always be modified. And that is kind of scary to think of because, if you're getting divorced or you're doing, a complaint for custody and getting a child support order, the thought that you're going to have to go back to court again soon is not a great thing to think about. But if there is a change in the finances of the party, either party at any time could file a modification seeking that the order be changed for a variety of reasons. And the most common one that we see in our firm is that there's usually been some change to one of the parties' employment. So we saw a lot of this, at the beginning of COVID, where people were being laid off and going on unemployment, so they lost their regular stream of income. So we saw child support modifications. There also could be, if it was no, daycare expense at the time of the divorce, and now, a parent's paying $500 a week, that would have, trigger a modification because that child care cost needs to be apportioned between the parties. If somebody is supposed to be paying health insurance for the kids and they lose their job, or now their health insurance isn't affordable anymore, there's been a change there, that can spur a modification. So either party at any time can file a modification in court seeking that the guidelines be rerun based on the current numbers. And if there is a difference between that number and the current order, then the court should grant the modification and change the order. A couple of things to note that are important about modifications. Let's say, for example, dad lost his job on July 1st, and he waits a couple of months to file a modification. Maybe he files it on October 1st. Then his ex doesn't get served until December 1st with the summons on the complaint for the modification. Mm-hmm. Even if it's determined that, yes, his child support should be lowered because he lost his job back in July, That order can only go into effect as of December 1st, because that's the date that the ex was served with the summons for the modification. So if something drastic happens in your employment and you are seeking relief, don't wait. Act on it as soon as possible, because you need to file and get the other party served so that you can have that retroactive order be as soon as possible. Another thing to note about modifications is if you are paying child support and you think that there's something that's happened that would, if you ran the numbers, cause you to have a lower child support amount, I would recommend that you definitely go online and do the numbers for yourself and possibly speak to an attorney too. Because sometimes we see situations where, for example, there's been parties that were divorced, maybe let's say 8 or 9 years ago, and there's been a child support order in effect that whole time. And now let's say one of the children is over age 18. So like I said before, over 18, there's a reduction of 25% in the order for a child over 18. So you think my child support should be going down, but you may not realize that the guidelines have been updated 2 or 3 times in the interim period. And usually with a new child support update, the child support order is going to increase because, like I said, with the cost of living, that's what the task force is looking to do. So we've had situations where we've had potential clients come in and, they think, oh, I think my child support should go down. And when we rerun the numbers, it actually looks like the child support should increase, even though, one child is now over 18 or a bunch of different reasons. But the point of this being is before you file a modification to lower your child support, you might want to talk to somebody, run some numbers, because you want to avoid a situation where you could end up with a higher child support order in the end. So that's modifications.
So essentially, based on those factors that you listed out, how many children you have, how much money each party makes, how the parenting schedule is divided, and then the expenses and stuff like that with childcare and healthcare. If any of those change, that's typically warranting for a modification, and it is the party's responsibility to, file it as soon as possible if any of those changes do happen.
Correct. And that's something else that's important to note. So let's say, at the time the order was entered, dad had primary physical custody. Mm-hmm. And then over time, the parties by agreement went to more of a 50-50 kind of parenting schedule, but they never filed that with the court. But this is what they've been doing for years. On the order that is still in effect is that, mom should probably be paying a hefty child support order to dad. Mm-hmm. And then we've had situations where, custody has changed completely, where, it's gone from dad to mom. Yeah. The child support needs to be updated to reflect that as well. So it doesn't happen automatically. Something has to be filed in court for that order to be changed, to be modified.
Gotcha. Okay. And so now are the guidelines, do the guidelines determine the length of child support? I know you mentioned, the age of 18, but I know the law in Massachusetts is until 23, unless otherwise specified, or unless the child obtains a undergraduate degree. Is that correct?
So child support in Massachusetts goes to age 18. However, child support can be ordered between ages 18 and 23 by a court. The court, by statute, has discretion whether they are going to order that child support continue between 18 and 23. But if a child is unemancipated, and we can talk about that briefly, then it's likely that the court is going to order that the child support continue between 18 and 23. So emancipation occurs, and there's a list of factors by statute, once the child turns 18. But if they're still in high school, then they're considered unemancipated. So it's only over 18 and out of high school. But the child is still considered unemancipated if they're going to school. So if they continue like in an undergraduate program, or they continue their schooling beyond high school, up until age 23. Once 23 hits, if they're still in college, they're taking the maybe 7-year route or something like that, it gets cut off at that point. But yes, in Massachusetts, child support can go up to age 23. There are some situations where, you know, a child may be over 18, but not in college, but the court can still order child support for a variety of reasons. If, you know, we've had cases where the children have significant special needs or developmental needs, and the court decides to still award child support during those years because of that. So there's different circumstances. The other thing to keep in mind with child support between 18 and 23 years old is the court is also going to consider how much, if any, either of the parents are contributing towards college expenses. Mm-hmm. So say dad is paying child support, the child turns 18 and is going to college, but dad is paying the lion's share of the college expenses, the court may say, you know, that is kind of substituting for what the child support would be and maybe not order a child support order. Or, you know, if he's paying, you know, a few $1,000s towards college expenses every semester, whatever the default number is for child support, they may deviate lower because of the contribution to college expenses. So 18 to 23 is another area where it can get a little murky, and you might want to seek some guidance from somebody based on your specific circumstances.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you so much for answering our questions about child support guidelines. I think this was a very, very helpful information. There will be a link to the mass.gov website in the description, just so, you know, if you are thinking about using that, you know, that tool to run some rough numbers yourself, absolutely. And we would always definitely encourage you to speak with an attorney regarding those numbers to see, you know, as Jolie said, it is definitely case by case to see if there's any other factors that could impact that number, depending on your case. So, all righty. Well, thank you so much, Attorney Vacchi. Do you have anything else? I think we've covered a lot in this area.
Covered a lot, but I know a 26-page document doesn't sound fun to read, but the guidelines actually do have a lot of important information in there. And some of the scenarios we talked about, like overtime income or bonus, or, you know, kids over 18, they have some very great commentary in there that might be specific to your case. So it's not a light read, but you could, you know, always check that out. But no, thank you for having me to talk about child support.
And if you do, you know, if you do read that, and obviously, you know, 26 pages, that can be a lot, but if you do have questions about child support guidelines, you can absolutely reach out to our office, and we can set up consultations with our lovely staff like Jolie, and we can go over those details with you so you get, you know, full understanding of what, you know, what your options are at that point. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.